Welcome to the Touch of Life Foundation's second week for the Virtual Volunteer Program for ages 14 and older. At this time, we will introduce the panelists from the Touch of Life Foundation. Hello, everyone. My name is Medna Sarin, and I am the president and co-founder of the Touch of Life Foundation.
Hello, my name is Meghana, and I'm on the board of directors for the Touch of Life Foundation.
Hi, my name is Avni, and I'm a board member for the Touch of Life Foundation.
When an individual is trafficked, victims experience both physical and psychological abuse. Traffickers often threaten and use physical and psychological abuse to control their victims. This might include emotional manipulations, beatings, starvation, poor living environments, gang rapes, amongst other egregious acts. Today we're going to be going over the physical and psychological effects of child labor and trafficking.
The physical effects of human trafficking include vision and eye problems, lung disease, permanent back or neck issues, starvation or inadequate nutrition, stunted growth, dental issues, violent beatings, infections, mutilations, sexually transmitted diseases, forced abortions or other gynecological problems, and also lack of normal doctor visits.
Vision and eye problems from working in industries such as carpet weaving, where they are constantly exposed to fibers getting into the child's eyes, or lack of proper light to do such intricate work, can put a big strain on the victim's eyes, as shown in the pictures on the side. Sometimes violence aimed at a victim can lead to permanent eye injury, as pictured here on the top and the bottom.
Permanent back or neck issues from working long hours in unsafe conditions, being unable to take a break. For example, children working in sweatshops who sit in the same position for 12 hours a day without taking a break, or other victims who work in the fields or mining coal who have to pick up heavy loads on their tender backs.
Another way traffickers exert control is by starving their victims or giving them inadequate nutrition if they do not listen or do not look the way the trafficker wants. If the victim did not do the work they were supposed to do, they might not get food for that day. The lack of food in the critical years of child growth can lead to stunted growth as well.
Violent beatings are yet another way victims are controlled. They often experience fractured bones, concussions, soft tissue tears, burns, and even brain trauma. Many times a trafficker will beat the victim in places that cannot be seen to keep it unnoticeable.
Infections or mutilations from improperly performed medical procedures such as abortion can cause harm on the victim's bodies. Victims can also be mutilated or burned if they do not perform up to the trafficker's standards, or they can get a finger or toe cut off from the machinery that they are used to perform the labor. Imagine doing work on machinery with a blade for 12 hours a day with inadequate food. Your body will not be able to be as vigilant after a few hours, especially when you are not given the proper nutrition or training to even use this dangerous machinery. Rape and forced prostitution. Traffickers may rape or gang rape a victim to exert control over him or her, to try to break the victim down by shaming them. Sexually transmitted diseases such as HIV, AIDS, herpes, gonorrhea, and chlamydia often happen when the victim is forced to engage in sex acts, oftentimes without permission. If a trafficking victim gets pregnant from these acts because they are not using protection, they may be taken to an safe place who will perform an abortion improperly, which can lead to other issues such as infection, scar tissues, or other conditions. Gynecological problems can occur from improper sex acts, such as infertility, amongst others.
The lack of normal doctor checkups could lead to health issues that could have been otherwise avoided if caught early. Undetected or untreated diseases such as diabetes or cancer. Trafficked victims and child laborers are forced to work in places such as coal mines, where they inhale dangerous air for prolonged periods of time without protection. Others might be farming tobacco, which is very dangerous for a child's developing lungs. Farming oftentimes exposes them to dangerous pesticides and other chemicals used to grow crops.
Trafficking can lead to dental issues as well. Trafficked victims are not able to engage in proper hygiene and do not have visits with a dentist for regular teeth cleaning and cavity fillings, which can lead to decay and rotting teeth. Other times, there might be physical abuse where the victim's teeth might get knocked out.
According to the U.S. National Library of Medicine, there are 11 common psychological effects of human trafficking. These include Stockholm Syndrome, substance abuse, anxiety, depression, alienation, disorientation, aggression, trouble trusting, suicidal isolation, eating disorders, and post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD.
Stockholm Syndrome, the feeling of trust or affection felt in many cases of kidnapping by a victim towards its captor, is the psychological defense mechanism that helps keep the victim alive during trafficking. By developing feelings toward their captor, victims are less likely to develop suicidal tendencies while being trafficked. Unfortunately, after victims are rescued, they are more likely to have feelings of sadness or depression, similar to a person that has gone through a breakup.
Victims often develop addictions to substances during their trafficking. These drugs are usually used as a way to control the victims if the victim is unwilling to do certain things. Other victims will engage in drug use to cope with the conditions that they're being forced to work in. Also, making them have an addiction to drugs serves as another way to keep victims from running away because of the dependence on getting the drug to satisfy their addiction. This substance abuse often continues after the rescue of trafficking victims, as victims use it as a way to forget about the trauma that they have gone through.
Anxiety can be developed by the emotional and physical abuse that victims endure during trafficking. Because most victims are part of some form of slavery, they would be scared of not doing the job correctly, fearing the punishment that would come if it was not done to someone's expectations. This worrying continues long after they are rescued from human trafficking. Depression can be caused by feelings of shame and guilt. The traumatic situation that victims experience often lead to them feeling as though there is no hope for them in the future, which leads to main periods of intense sadness. Alienation, the state or experience of being isolated from a group, is also an effect from the shame and guilt that victims feel.
Disorientation is mainly felt when trying to connect back with the life victims had before human trafficking. Because of the amount of time they had spent away from their friends and family, many trafficking victims miss a big part of other people's lives, and it can be difficult to catch up. This is especially true if the personalities of their friends and families also change, making them seem like completely different people.
Aggression from human trafficking victims is often caused because of pent-up emotions. Victims are often not allowed to express their emotions about their situations while being trafficked, which leaves them to bottle up their emotions such as anger and sadness. Once finally given the opportunity to express their emotions, victims usually explode with anger towards any small inconvenience. This aggression continues until the victim feels safe to express their emotions. Sometimes aggression is the only way victims are asking for help. Trouble trusting. Most victims were recruited by someone that they thought they could trust. Because of that, many victims find it much harder to trust people again, fearing that they will be misled again. Suicide or suicidal thoughts. Human trafficking has a grave effect on victims' physical as well as mental health. Even after a victim is rescued, many still have feelings of hopelessness and fear of acceptance. Social stigma is a big issue as well as acceptance by others. A study published in The Crisis stated approximately 53% of rescued victims experience suicidal thoughts. This increases 3 times more for sex trafficking victims. And over here, this statistic, a startling 23% of human trafficking victims have attempted suicide.
While there are many reasons why trafficking victims engage in eating disorders, oftentimes they do it to exert control over their lives, which they feel they otherwise have lost. Some victims were so used to rationing food since they did not get that much when they are trafficked, and continue to ration the food and eat very little, even after they are rescued, for fear of not having enough. Others will keep eating because they are deprived of food for so long. Some victims have poor self-image because their abuses were constantly putting them down, and they feel looking a certain way will make them feel beautiful.
Post-traumatic stress disorder, more oftenly called PTSD, is caused after a victim has experienced a traumatic event. The psychological effect often takes the longest time to recover from. Difficulty sleeping or concentrating is caused by remembering the trauma that victims had gone through. Many victims experience their trauma while sleeping, either through flashbacks or nightmares, which can cause them to avoid sleeping. PTSD can also cause poor sleep cycle, which can lead to tiredness throughout the day. Angry outbursts or aggressive behavior are because the victims are unable to process the emotions that they are feeling. This will cause them to bottle up their emotions and explode at any minor inconvenience.
Substance abuse. Victims often start taking drugs or other substances to forget about the trauma that they have gone through. It is difficult for victims to discontinue substance abuse, as many victims relapse after getting treatment. Negative thought about themselves and hopelessness about the future stem from feelings of shame or guilt about the action that victims performed during trauma. Victims get easily startled or frightened because of the trauma that they have experienced.
Difficulty maintaining close relationships is mainly caused by the fear of trust that victims have. Victims are afraid that someone they trust will lead them into a traumatic experience, just as someone else they trusted did before. This leads them to maintain an emotional distance in their relationships or break up a relationship if they get too attached. Victims' lack of interest in activities that were previously enjoyed is a side effect of them having no hope for the future. Doing activities that they previously had reminds them of the lives that they had before the trauma, and it also reminds them that they will probably never be the same. These symptoms can vary from person to person, but it can also start and end at different points in time.
Sleep disturbances are the most common PTSD symptoms of victims that experience sexual abuse or domestic labor. According to a cross-national study of human trafficking victims, 24% of women surveyed were shown to have these disturbances at least 90 days after being rescued. As stated before, sleep disturbances are caused by revisiting trauma, either through flashbacks or nightmares, or having a bad sleep cycle with being trafficked. Women that had disturbances were also more likely to have a higher risk of depression, suicide, and physical health problems. Victims that had come from previous places of violence or trauma were more likely to experience PTSD after getting trafficked. Examples of places are places with high rates of poverty, political imbalance, and are currently experiencing or recovering from war. The study also found that victims who were living in a helpful environment were more likely to have fewer symptoms of PTSD. In these communities, there are fewer victims being shamed or judged because of their experiences, which makes it easier to rejoin society.
According to the largest cross-national study of human trafficking, 44% of victims have shown indicators of PTSD.
Why don't victims ask for help? Some victims might not know they are being trafficked. Though emotional manipulation, traffickers convince the victims to do something. Therefore, since the victim agrees out of pressure, fear, or for another reason, the trafficker convinces the victim that they are a willing participant. For example, they might fear violence to themselves or a family member. Many times, traffickers threaten violence to the victim or their families if they do not comply with the trafficker's demands. They might not know where they are. Oftentimes, traffickers blindfold or drug the victim and take them to different states or even to different countries. Victims find it hard to escape if they do not know where they are or where they're trying to go. They might not know the local language. The victim might be thinking even if they escape, they will not be able to communicate with anyone else, which will make escaping and finding a safe spot even more difficult. The trafficker maintains tight control over the victim, thus limiting the amount the victim can talk to people, so the victim has no way of reaching out for help, even if he or she wanted to. Personal belongings have been confiscated. The trafficker may have confiscated the victim's identification, cell phone, and money. This makes it especially difficult when the victim has been trafficked in another country, where they do not know the language, do not have any ID or money, and they do not know who to trust. Imagine yourself in this situation, where you're unable to communicate with anyone. It can be very frightening. All right, so for this next slide, we do have a case study, and the victim is Tanya, and she will be sharing her experience.
At first it was just supposed to be like, oh, this is what we were doing to make money, because he wasn't making enough money to pay for his child support and everything. And after he started to like make me do it every night and stuff, I started to realize, but in my head, I drink, I do whatever drugs he had just to like clear my mind so I wouldn't think about it, because at the time I felt like he was perfect to me. You know, he was there and he'd tell me like, hey, you know, your mom doesn't love you, no one loves you because they're not looking for you and they don't care where you sleep, and like, you live with me and I take care of you. What are you gonna do without me? Because you can't get an apartment on your own, you can't get a hotel. It was basically like I needed him, and like I said, I felt that I loved him. Physically, I didn't really feel anything, but emotionally, it took a toll on me. Like I didn't feel like I was a person. I felt really bad. There was nights I couldn't sleep. There's times I thought about killing myself. I just thought about like the type of person I was, what people would think about me if they knew what I was doing, what my mom would say, just stuff like that.
All right, for this week's project, you're going to continue working on your 4-minute video, and if you have any questions or need any help, feel free to contact us at msaran@touchoflifefnd.org.
It is now time for the Q&A. If you have any questions or comments, please put them in the chat or the Q&A box.
Additionally, this will be posted on YouTube, so feel free to put your questions in the comments below. All right, thank you guys.